I was re-listening in my mind to a few things I said at the beginning, talking about how we've slightly changed our costumes today. I'm talking, some of you are brand new today, so you don't know, but many of you come every week, so I thought I would give you a clearer picture of what's happening here because it's instructive. All of you who have been coming for weeks know that we usually wear a silk wrapped around us. Swaddled is the phrase we've been using just because we've had to have a lot of conversations about the shawl and the wrap and the swaddle and the drape, and so we've gotten our vocabulary exact. And that outfit came some 30 almost years ago when Swami Kriyananda wrote the Festival of Light and tried to formalize Ananda a little bit more. Most of you have known it no other way, but those of us who came up through the ranks from a younger age sort of watched it develop. He wanted to create a Sunday experience that had some consistent power regardless of who was leading it. This is the point of ritual. So the Festival of Light, which you see every week, is a repeating story about the soul's journey, written poetically, and by experiencing it every week, it goes deeper and deeper into our consciousness. This is the power of ritual when it's done correctly. Ritual is not a magic formula. Merely to go through a ritual does not necessarily do anything for you, but an appropriately inspired ritual does give you the opportunity to focus your attention in a way that can gradually transform you. As part of that, Swami Kriyananda wanted all of us, to take ourselves a little more seriously is one way to put it, and also just put that touch of formality into our experience with each other, that we would understand what we were engaged in, that it wasn't just a bunch of people sitting around sort of taking turns talking to each other, that there was also a dignity. And at that time, the first light bearer costume was made out of essentially white sheets from an angel costume for Halloween. I never would put it on. I simply couldn't. But I took it upon myself to find something more appropriate for the circumstances in which we found ourselves, which was here. And gradually over the years, it's changed and changed. And then when Swami created the Nayaswami order in 2009 and switched our color from white to those of us who've taken this initiation and wear blue, which is a whole story in itself, then once again it went through a certain iteration. For renunciation and for religious life, what you wear is not the definition of your spirituality, but it does have an effect on it, because what you wear declares often to the world who you are and what you believe in. That's why our brahmacharis and brahmacharinis wear yellow, our Nayaswamis wear blue, and in all religious orders there's something characteristic about it. And being a light bearer, having this responsibility. So the other thing that's happening, and this is of interest to everyone also, most of you know, Swami Kriyananda died 3 years ago, almost exactly 3 years ago. And prior to that time, although he was greatly withdrawn from the practical administration of Ananda, he still was the divine center of it. And whenever any significant thing had to be decided, one always endeavored at least, to get his input on it. And because by this time and that time we had become quite a global work and were happening on 3 continents in many languages, we often had to pool our resources to find out what did he say to whom and why, and it wasn't just as simple as this is what the rule is. So we've been happily wearing these robes for a long time, and then we had a colonies leaders meeting 10 days ago, and it came out that in Italy, a number of years ago, Swamiji had switched the costume from the swaddle to the drape, which has met with mixed reviews. Some are very fond of it, some are not fond of it. When I said to you it's not open for conversation, what I meant by that was we've all compared notes, and nobody can find much wiggle room on this one. Sometimes you can say, well, he said this to that person for that reason and to me for this reason. But it's been traced pretty much to the base. So this is it. I hope you like it. It's easier to get dressed. It's easier to wear. Who knows? Some of us like change. Some of us don't. There you have it. But nonetheless, when I said your comments are welcome, but it's not open for conversation, I realized I was rather contradicting myself. Now, all of this actually has to do with our reading today, which is one of the reasons why I was just laughing. I was remembering the first day when we were living in Palo Alto and we changed from street clothes into our gowns. That was the first day we said, who notices anything different today? Because for the first time we were dressed in this way. When Uma McFarland, she's from England, and her parents, who were not at all involved in Ananda's work, came to visit her. Her name was Annie before she was called Uma by Swami. And they came to visit her, and they went to her services and on. She was wearing a white robe. And later on, they went home, and they showed to the relatives, see, when Annie's in her nightie, that's when she's working. So that's sort of sometimes how we think. We're trying to move above that. I think we've passed. All right. The reading that we have today about light and darkness and coming into the light and holding your failures from the light, it's an extremely subtle, and it's a very, very important part of the spiritual path. And if we can find our way through this, because here's what Swamiji said years ago. When Master was alive, we now, for those of us who've come to this path by reading Autobiography of a Yogi or seeing the movie Awake or something happening where we find out about Yogananda. Maybe you came for other reasons, but that brought a lot of people here. Or once you're here, you begin to find out about who he was. He died in 1952, and none of us were ever with him in his physical body here. Most of the people who knew him in his physical body are passing quickly off the earth because that's what happens, time passes. Well, we often think in our minds, oh, if only I'd had the karma to be born then, I could have come, I could have lived with him like Swami did, I could have gotten all that direct teaching, all those, it sounds so wonderful. Swamiji says when he was living at Mount Washington with Master, the Mount Washington property that Master bought for his ashram had been a hotel. And Swamiji said, in many ways, it remained a hotel. He said people would check in and they would check out. They would check in and they would check out. They would come, they would be disciples, they'd live there for a time, and then they'd just move on. And they often had all these different reasons why they moved on. But Swamiji raised an interesting observation. When you're in the presence of great energy, as Master expressed, when you're in the presence of someone who has a great radiating light and a clarity about who they are and where they're going and what they're doing and why he came into the world, as of course an avatar does, then whenever you're near that, your own reality has to change in order to meet that. You can't just kind of go along in your sleepy way. I believe it was last week I was talking about one of the reasons why I always enjoyed Swami Kriyananda's company is because it did require that you be awake and ready. He did not allow you to just sort of sleepily, unconsciously, habitually respond to things. He was always wide awake, and it required that. And I personally just loved that. Swamiji said when Master was there, what happens is in the presence of a vibration that is so in the center of truth, any little aberration of your own really shows. And what happened, Swami said, was that most people simply didn't want to see themselves that clearly. Really, just as simple as that. Because it's more comfortable to kind of decide that we're okay. And there's a confusion that sets in because on one hand, and this is also what I want to say to you, we are okay. We're wonderful. We're children of God. We are children of the light. We have nothing to worry about ever. But in our actual realization, we're really far from okay. And we all know that. We're restless when we meditate. We wake up in the night filled with worries. We have aches and pains. We have unfulfilled desires. We have little black clouds of this and that, floating around. I hope this isn't the final point. If this is it, we've been lied to by the masters. Let's just put it like that. There has to be more than this. There has to be. I know there is. We've all glimpsed it. We know it's there. But in the presence of a true vibration, then we hear what our melody is really doing. And Swamiji said very simply, most people just didn't want to know. So they found some fault with Yogananda so that they could go away. Go to someone who is less challenging or leave the path altogether. Because one of the hardest things for us to do is to develop one of the greatest virtues on the spiritual path is humility. And Master had a brilliant definition of humility. Humility is simply self-honesty. That there's so many times that Master and Swamiji put words together just exactly right. Humility is self-honesty. We are neither better nor worse. We just simply are what we are. And we've been at this business of being a human being, sort of inching our way toward the infinite light, for a really long time. We've had many, many lifetimes of experience. Just reflect for just a moment on just this lifetime that you've lived. And in our particular age, we get to have many experiences in one lifetime. It's not, agrarian times where you're born on the farm and die on the farm and your kids die on the farm and it's just nothing ever happens. Many of you have changed cultures and countries and careers and life situations just over and over again. And we've had big successes and terrible tragedies and just so many different experiences. And just sort of think about that sort of moving thread of our own consciousness through all of that, trying to understand what's happening, trying to respond in the proper way. And the proper way is the way which by our own experience leads us to greater and greater happiness. That's all that right and wrong really is. It's not right and wrong from some arbitrary point of somebody judging us on this basis. When Ananda was engaged in this terrible litigation that was imposed upon us for more than a decade, I worked a lot with the legal situation, and Naidruva, who was one of our attorneys, we talked about it almost every day. And we as non-lawyers were always trying to second guess what we could do, and we'd figure it out logically, or we'd figure it out righteously, and we would propose this and propose that. Finally, Naidruva made it very clear. She said, law is not logical. She says, law is not intuitive. Law is political, she said. It simply is what it is. You find out what it is and you adapt to it, and that's how it works. But divine law is entirely intuitive. It doesn't always logic to this mind, but it's entirely intuitive in this way. It is determined by the experiential result. And the experiential result is always toward greater happiness and freedom. Not necessarily in the short run. Because as Master writes in one of his whispers, he says, teach me that the ways of vice, though sweet at the beginning, are bitter at the end. And the ways of virtue, though difficult at the beginning, are pure sweetness at the end. Because, as Swami said, everything is a bit relative. We can really have a great time at a drunken party while it's happening. But then the next morning, when the regret and the hangover and the embarrassment hit us, then we realize that it wasn't really a lasting kind of happiness. And gradually, that's what we find out. It's not just a matter of being told. It's a matter of trying it out. And when we look back over the course of just this one incarnation, we see all the experiments that we tried to see whether they were going to work for us or not. And if we're wide awake and listening, and if we have enough humility to learn, because you see, without humility you can't learn. Because unless you are self-honest enough to actually be able to see clearly what happened and your part in it, then we never make any progress. And no, so humility is not this sort of abject, tiny, oh, I'm so terrible, don't look at me, I'm really worthless sort of thing. It's that in itself is a different kind of egotism, because where is the concern? It's always about me and my tiny little terrible position, which is really no different than my great and mighty exaggerated position. Spiritual progress depends on humility because it depends on just being honest about what is. A friend of mine who used to, she was with another ashram, and her job for many years was to just travel to their different centers around the country and around the world and teach. She didn't actually live anywhere, and she just traveled. And I met her in some city, we intersected, and we were having a wonderful visit, and I realized it was almost time for her program. And I said to her, do you need to get ready for the program you're going to give? And she looked up and she said, too late, just like that. She said, what you see is what you get. Just completely relaxed. She says, it's too late. If I'm not ready now, I'm not going to be ready 30 minutes from now. Later, this same girl, beautiful girl, she was given an assignment in the ashram that was just way beyond her skill set. She just really didn't know how to do it. But she stumbled along and was doing, by her own admission, a rather terrible job. And finally, she was becoming so distressed by it, she sat down to meditate and she spoke to her master. And she said, you want this job done better? You get somebody else. If this is what you want, I'll keep doing it. Just that easy. You put me in this position, this is what I do. You want it done better? You get somebody else, or you make me into somebody else. And so what happens to us in the course of our lives, of course, is we get pushed. Thank you, Lord. We get pushed beyond what we already know. Because that is the whole point, isn't it? I spent a very brief period of time lifting weights, going regularly to lift weights in the gym, which really, that sort of was my definition of hell, practically. It was just, I know people enjoy it, but really I just became so bored so fast. The boredom would set in almost instantly, and it would just become like a frantic, terminal kind of boredom. I just couldn't do it. But I was there long enough to realize that if you can just lift it like that, you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing in there, right? That was a way to get it done faster. You have to have something that makes you have to really pull, don't you? Otherwise, you're completely wasting your time. So why would we have a whole incarnation where we just go like this? Where would we be at the end of it? Just old, dead, and starting over again, that's all. Naturally. And the more we are able to lift and pull and push, what's going to happen to us next is that the weights are going to increase, aren't they? And what's the first thing that's going to happen to us when the weights are going to increase? We're not going to be able to lift them. What a surprise. A friend wrote to me, somebody I've never met, but she found the recordings on the internet and wrote me and talked about the recordings and talked about her life. And bless her heart, she had some fairly big issues to deal with. Just like quite a few things that had happened to her already that ended with ill health in the hospital, surgery like this. And I wrote back to her without even thinking about it. I said, well, it looks like you chose a lifetime in which you get to make a lot of progress and learn a lot of things. She wrote back and she said, nobody has ever congratulated me for my life being such a mess. She said, I found it strangely soothing. But in fact, that's exactly right. And the mere fact that we're failing at it, when you go into the gym and you can't do it yet, we don't consider that failure, do we? We just consider that the inevitable process. I've been working with Marcel and a group of others for a play that we're going to be putting on Memorial Day weekend. Swami's beautiful story, The Land of Golden Sunshine. It's going to be really good. You should come. And I'm the narrator. Ramurti and I are the narrators. And the way the play is, we give most of the lines. It's a rather complicated story, and Swamiji's writing is very rich, very textured. And Ramurti and I both read pretty well, but Marcel is much better than both of us, and he has really been putting us through our paces like neither of us has ever really been put through before. It's like, mostly people just say we're pretty good. But we're not good enough. Not good enough for what it could be. It's very, very interesting to watch, when you're confronted with the fact that you're not really doing this as well as it could be done. There's just that, and this is what our reading is about today. That first impulse, the first impulse to say is, well, I could actually do it better, but I have a little tummy ache because I had a bad breakfast. Or just give me a little coffee and it'll be better. Or wait until the actual performance and then I'll be good. There's just like 100 ways in which you want to put a shadow over the light. That's just what the Bible talks about. When we, those who don't love the light, when we have error, we hide from the light, lest our deeds be exposed. And he's not talking in some cosmic way. He's talking about that little impulse that says, instead of humbly saying, yeah, wow. And humility says, I read pretty well. I'm not really terrible at this, but wow, Marcel's a lot better. That's just self-honesty. That's all. And so he can teach me something. And sometimes it's direct, like this, and theater or whatever skill you're trying to learn is a marvelous place to learn many qualities, where it's just some very direct. Life is a little more complicated. We're going along thinking we're being a pretty nice person and thinking we're being pretty successful, thinking we have our life fairly together, and then, a truck just drives through the middle of it, and, oh, did I smash your dreams? Oh, I'm so sorry. And there you are. And it's a weight that you think you can't lift. What do we do? What do we do then? Do we hide? It's a great tendency to do that. Being in community is marvelous that way because we can't. A friend of mine once did let's just say it wasn't his shining hour. We won't really go into any more detail. And there was just this desire to have no one know. I said, well, in this community, where we're all in this together, I said, you just walk out of your door and you lift your chin and you look everyone in the eye and you don't flinch. I said, 2 days from now, no one will even be thinking about it. Because we're all in this together. And you might not be so lucky as some people may gloat and enjoy your failures when they come, but who cares? That everyone gets their own karma. You don't have to worry about it. But for us, we need that humility, that self-honesty. Yeah, wow, look at this. This is a whole big thing I didn't plan to learn, but now I get to. This is a whole big part of myself I didn't know was there. I remember I had struggled for so many years with this very difficult internal karma that I had, and I really thought I'd made big progress. All I actually had was a recess. And then when class started again, I discovered that I was like nowhere in terms of this. I mean, I'd just been like given a break. And then I turned around and whack, just like that. And I was so upset. I mean, I was, and I was with Swami in a car, and I was just crying. I was hunched over in the passenger seat, just weeping. And he just so calmly, but firmly, well, he said, you thought you were over it, so you weren't putting out any energy to get better, were you? No, he said, well, you aren't over it, so now you know. Meaning now you can get to work. So where is the tragedy? The tragedy was that I was taking a free ride when I wasn't finished. The good news is, now I know. But you see what a reverse that is? And what humility is required to go there? In The Imitation of Christ, which is a very interesting, extremely interesting little book, Master recommended only a few books. In fact, Master said, I don't usually recommend books outside of what our own masters have taught. But The Imitation of Christ he offered, Thomas à Kempis. It's a beautiful story, beautiful book. But there's this very interesting thought in there. It's a bit subtle, but it's woven in there. that God will continually cause you to fail. God will cause you to fail, so that you will always remember to be alert and ready, and so that you will always know that it's the grace of God always that saves you. And here's one more part of that Master put into it. He said, God loves one who is courageous in the face of defeat. Interesting thought, isn't it? God especially loves, that's what he said, one who is courageous in the face of defeat. Now think about it. We think that God loves us when we sail through perfectly, don't we? Because that's how we like ourselves to be. But where is character really revealed? Character is really revealed when it isn't so simple. And character is really revealed when absolutely nothing goes right. And that's one of the reasons in the Imitation of Christ, he said, God always keeps us just a little bit off balance, because that's when we get to find out who we really are. It's easy to just be steady and strong when there's only 2 pounds of weight. What happens when you're really burdened down? That's when the spine, the bones really get strong. God loves someone who's really courageous in defeat. I want to read for you again, because this is absolutely one of the most beautiful verses in all of the Gita. Master said, this is where it shows the sweetness of God. Cling thou to me. Clasp me with heart and mind. So shalt thou dwell surely with me on high. But if thy thought droops from such height, if thou beest weak to set body and soul upon me constantly, despair not. Give me lower service. Seek to reach me, worshipping with steadfast will. And if thou canst not worship steadfastly, work for me. Toil in works pleasing to me, for he that laboreth right for love of me shall finally attain. And this is the whole heart of it. But if in this thy faint heart fails, bring me thy failure.